Good morning. It looks like it's going to be a while before we have Sunday school. So therefore, like the pastor, I decided it's time to move into the world of virtual teaching. Since the beginning of the year, my class has been studying the book of Ecclesiastes. I had never really studied this book, and I do not think I'm alone in my limited knowledge of Ecclesiastes, because as I talk with other Christians, they tend to avoid this book. And there's a number of reasons for this, but I think one of the most common reasons is people find this book depressing. And this is a fair response because, as most Christians know, the verses that are repeated most commonly say, "Vanities of vanity, everything is vanity." And this is repeated over and over during the book. This starts as the second verse of the book. "Vanities of vanities," says the preacher. "Vanities of vanity, all is vanity." And that's one of the most common things that people know about this book. A second thing people know about this book is the conclusion. The conclusion says, "Fear God and keep his commandments." A nice thought, but not the most uplifting thing. And finally, the third thing that a lot of people know about this book is related to the 1960s folk song, "Turn, Turn, Turn," which is based on chapter 3 of the book. But most people that know that song don't realize that Pete Singer basically copied these lyrics from Ecclesiastes. But if you've attended my Sunday school class, you knew that fact, and you also have known a lot of other facts about the book of Ecclesiastes. And you've also learned that the preacher in Ecclesiastes is really sending a message of hope. Unfortunately, that message of hope is lost when you do a quick, superficial reading of the book. So if this is your level of knowledge of Ecclesiastes, I encourage you to come on along and study with us the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a little catching up we need to do, but we'll try to complete this before we get back into church altogether. So as I said, there's three things that people know about Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to start with that folk song, the third thing, "Turn, Turn, Turn." I'll spare you my singing, but if I started out singing it, it would go like this: "To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn." Many people could pick up on that melody and complete the song. And what they're doing is they're basically reciting the first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. This song was made famous by Pete Singer, and the words are from chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, and he has acknowledged this, and in fact he donates 50% of the song's royalties to Jewish causes. He feels he retains 50% because he still wrote the music and put it all together, so he felt that was worth 50% of the royalties. But he does admit that his song lyrics are the words of the preacher. And I say words of the preacher because this is how the book starts. And this is technically the author of the book. Verse 1 says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem." And most Old Testament scholars acknowledge that this person then is Solomon. So going back to the song that Solomon really wrote, "Turn, Turn, Turn," it's a 1960s anti-establishment song that describes the world like the preacher did, and that there's a pattern to the world, a time for everything, and a time to turn. And another thing that's important is Mr. Seeger added a little bit of extra, and he said it was not too late. And this was a message to his young audience in the 60s who were anti-war, anti-establishment, that it was not too late for them to come together and change the world for the good. But this message, the message that Mr. Seeger sends in his song, is not the message of the preacher. The preacher is saying something different, as we'll learn later in our study. The next thing we want to focus on is that statement, everything is meaninglessness. It's a natural conclusion of the book. It keeps saying vanities of vanities, everything is vanities, and it's repeated 12 times in the book. The original Hebrew word used here is hevel, Hevel. And this is a difficult word to translate because it literally means breath or vapor. So the literal translation of this passage is vapor of vapor. And what the English translators have come up with is meaninglessness, pointlessness, worthlessness, and the various frustrations of life. And we ask ourselves throughout the book, why is life like this? Pete Singer says we can change the world. The book of Ecclesiastes says we can't change anything, life is meaningless. And at this point you might be saying, is this supposed to help me during the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic? And I will say yes, because we've learned some things in our Sunday school. The first thing is our hope is not on us changing the world, despite what Mr. Seeger wrote about. And the second thing is that whilst, yes, the wisest man in the world said that life under the sun is meaninglessness, that there are other messages that he's also trying to portray. So as we will see, there are a lot of misconceptions about this book. We had started this study back in January, and to give a little bit of background, the title comes really out of Latin, and the Latin title comes from the original Greek word ekklesia, which is where they get the word Ecclesiastes, and ecclesia, of course, means assembly. So the book is about someone who is talking to the assembly. And that person is referred to in various terms in the book, preacher, leader, teacher, but it's all about a wise leader speaking words to the assembly. And as we've noted, we feel as scholars that that wise leader is King Solomon. So going back to chapter 1, you see the chapter title, it says all is vanity, and that really sets the tone for the book, and it's a repeated theme. Life is meaningless. We don't really achieve anything. We don't fix anything. Even wisdom does not get us anywhere. This theme can be seen also in a special movie. A movie that would be a good movie to watch during your times at home these days. And that movie's called Groundhog Day. It's a 1990s romantic kind of chick flick, lighthearted comedy that stars Bill Murray and is a good way to pass time. And as an added bonus, Gaffney's own Andy McDowell is also starring in the movie. And it's a movie about a Pennsylvania weatherman, Phil Connors, who goes to Puxatawny, Pennsylvania to watch the groundhog come out of his hole. But something strange happens to Phil. Groundhog Day just keeps repeating itself over and over and over. And about halfway through the movie, Phil's starting to realize that he is stuck repeating the same day over and over and over. And this is where the movie intersects with our book, Ecclesiastes. Bill Murray turns in one famous scene to a couple guys in a bowling alley bar and says, what would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was the same, and nothing you did really mattered. And one of the guys looks down into his beer mug and says, "Yep, that about sums it up for me." And we laugh. Like a good comedy will do, is make us laugh. But let's face it, we're laughing about reality there. And that's what a good comedy will make us do sometimes, is that we'll nervously laugh about some of the struggles of life. So I don't want to ruin the end of the story, so you have to stream the movie, but the point is well taken. For the most part, life is a vanity. Life has its meaninglessness. So those are the two things the average person knows about the book of Ecclesiastes. He knows turn, 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 there is a season, turn, 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 and vanities of vanities. Everything is vanity. But there's so much more to the book, especially if you dig in and read it, every little verse. And that's a great way to open your eyes to the beauty of the Bible. So I would encourage you to maybe pause the video right now and read chapter 1 all by yourself. And you'll see that there's more than just vanity of vanities there. So now that we've looked at the chapter, I want you to look at verses 14 and 15. Verse 14 starts out, "I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted." The verses here say, under the sun, everything is crooked. Life is broken. This world's cursed. Our roads are crooked. They cannot be made straight. This is an extremely important point that Solomon is making. Let me repeat the concept. What is crooked cannot be made straight. But there's another thing that we need to highlight too. Go back up to verse 14. It says, under the sun. What does he mean by that? Solomon, when he says, and he says this repeatedly in the book, under the sun, he is talking about life on earth. Life down here. Life from an earthbound perspective. And he's looking at life from an earthly perspective. And he makes the conclusion that in our fallen state, outside of the Garden of Eden, life is meaningless. But he's also going to say in Ecclesiastes, he's going to talk about life under heaven. You can find that phrase in the book too, and you'll see it there in verse 13. Under heaven refers to viewing life from an eternal perspective. This is a different view. This is an important view. So Solomon is talking about under the sun, life is meaninglessness. So for a life under the sun, life is like Phil Connors in the movie Groundhog Day. And that is depressing. And the fact that we cannot make the road straight, that our road is crooked, that is depressing. We all know, east of Eden, separated from God, we live in a cursed, meaningless existence. And this is a point that Solomon is making. Paul, the apostle, makes the same point in Romans 8, starting at verse 20. He says that the creation itself will be set free from the bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. What's Paul saying? Fallen creation is futile and in bondage. It's screaming for a rescue. Humanity rebelled against God, and now humanity lives in a cursed world. Nothing we do will satisfy. There's no profit to our activity. So that's the sum of my initial teaching on the book of Ecclesiastes. Yes, everything is meaninglessness. And if you read in chapter 2 especially, you'll read more about Solomon's search for meaning, and you'll read that his conclusion was the same, that life under the sun is meaninglessness. But hopefully you'll also see, and as we go forward in the next couple of weeks, you'll also see that there is hope in the book. And that hope comes from knowing that there is a life under heaven. And life under heaven takes us to a very different place. So in the meantime, be safe, do your social distancing, wash your hands, and we'll be back again soon. And let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for sending us Jesus to die on the cross and to raise from the dead. We ask for a blessing over these people and protect them from sickness. And let's do all for the glory of God. In your name, amen.